Hello, Judith.
Hello, Rose.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Shall we revisit our trip to the National Gallery?
Let's do that.
So we went a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it, to the National Gallery, to the Sainsbury wing, which is where they show their early Renaissance paintings. And then we had a little heated discussion, didn't we?
We did, because you favoured Masaccio, the master of the early Renaissance, and I rather like the Gentile da Fabriano, who is a perfect representative of the International Gothic style.
And it's almost as if the National Gallery set it up, didn't they? Because
they did. I'm sure they did.
The cunning things among them next to each other, which is very strange because when you look at them, you think these can't possibly be even made in the same time or place. But they were. They're exact same time. But the Masaccio is a Renaissance work of art. So it means rebirth, the Renaissance. And there's this rebirth of classical spirit in it, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So it's got this beautiful heaviness to it. This these folds which reveal the body rather than a stiff, flat brocade. And with that, I think you feel the humanity of the woman, of Mary, sitting there with her child who happens to be Jesus, but it's also her child who will suffer on the cross. So I think that heaviness gives us a sense of her humanity, and of course the classical references give her stature as well. See these beautiful drapery. It's just lovely, isn't that?
The chiaroscuro, the light-dark contrast is beautifully rendered. Very, very naturalistic. And the classical influence that you just showed earlier with the figure there, where did they encounter that?
They're based in Tuscany and Florence, but they would go on trips to Rome, little archaeological trips. They were quite big archaeological trips, and we know this because of references like this. Really, really astonishing, isn't it? You'd think someone had made it up, but I promise you it's true. It's an archaeological, early Christian, late classical sarcophagus, so a place where someone was buried. So again, you've got the reference to the fate that's waiting for Jesus, directly referenced. But you've also got something very, very new, which is perspective, linear perspective, using the rather artificial system. We were used to it, but it was invented, this artifice, to draw us into the painting. So you can follow those lines of the lutes that recede in space, and they take us to the Virgin. And then if we keep following the lines up, they converge on the Christ child. And what a beautiful child.
Indeed, I have to say, there is nothing like it. I mean,
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah, no, it is a beautiful baby. It is a human baby. And, I always thought, it's a complex term, humanism, Renaissance humanism, and we haven't got the time to go into the depth of it, but it's all around the human, and there's a little human being as it lives and breathes and stuffs its mouth with the grapes.
So sweet, aren't they? Have you ever seen baby put a grape in its mouth?
I know, really greedy with his pudgy little arms.
Adorable.
And of course there is more behind it as well. The grapes are
well, they're a symbol, exactly. So it's a lovely bit of naturalism, isn't it? Because you've got the idea of the baby in the grape, the grape popping in its mouth, looking ecstatic, but also this is a special baby who's born to die to redeem us. And so those grapes are also a reference to the fate that has been predicted for him in the Bible.
Yes. And so now let's see if we look at both of those babies next to each other. I think that's quite a good comparison word that says a lot about the difference of these styles. On the left we have the Masaccio baby, and on the right is Gentile's baby.
Which has no weight whatsoever, does it? It just looks like he's floating around. He kind of looks like a stuffed toy, perhaps.
Oh, I think that's massively exaggerated. He's not a stuffed toy at all.
Well, he looks sort of like he's floating, doesn't he? Not to you.
Well, no, look how he is held. He is not floating because he's held by his mother. Can you see that? I'm really offended in the place of Gentile. No, because what you don't annoy me, of course, Rose. We've been working together for many years. But what annoys me is a certain prejudice that's often held against the International Gothic, that it is the lesser style, it is the old-fashioned style, the style that has been overcome by the early Renaissance. And I think that's a little bit simplistic, because they have, of course, coexisted, as these two paintings show so well. And while it is of course in love with the decorative and the pattern, the beautiful and the graceful, it is also not entirely true that it's only about surface. Look at this child closely, and you see that he has a tender face, and that there is a tender relationship between the mother and the child. She's holding him clearly on her lap, and yes, the artist is not interested in chiaroscuro and volume as much, but he's still interested in relationship. And if you look at the gaze that happens between the angels that are just pushing forward the curtain behind the baby and Jesus himself, there is a connection that of course also means us, that we will be saved by Christ. And the way he holds that little daisy so pointed between his thumb and his forefinger.
Which I just thought of it, but that is a reference to death, isn't it? It's a daisy that's plucked that will die. So perhaps even amidst all that courtly glamour, there is a little intimation of mortality for him.
Of course there is. And
I love the way he's holding her jacket. That's very sweet, isn't it? That baby way. They love grabbing things, don't they?
They do. See, there is also some observation, but clearly that's not the key interest. The key interest of the artist is in the beautiful, in beauty. So here, when we see them again next to each other, I mean, quite clearly you have that hieratic, heavy, classical Madonna, and here you have this graceful woman with her baby sitting on a throne that is surrounded by beautiful fabrics and on these kind of golden steps. And where this comes from is, of course, tapestries,
which were very, very, very precious, weren't they? Much more
so than paintings, absolutely. And that's what houses were decorated with.
Very helpful when it's chilly as well.
Yeah, things always have also practical reason. Good to think about that. And you can see that there's a lovely term called the horror vacui, the horror of the empty.
Well, it's certainly that,
and it's certainly that, and in that tapestry, and you also see that in the Gentile. And if you think of it as a whole, because of course. We and the museum see those beautiful panels, but they were part of a bigger ensemble, of polyptych, an altarpiece of several poly pieces that you would pray to. You can get that sense of the decorative and these kind of architectural arrangement of the panels much more. And the same goes, of course, for the
I know, it's all very well me saying how naturalistic it is, but actually, if we have the period eye, if we see it in the way it would have been seen, it would have been a sea of gold.
Absolutely.
And actually, it's interesting as well to think the perspective would have been how that would have worked, that it's actually meant to be seen from much lower down than we see it in the gallery.
Yes.
And that could also be her bigness, isn't it? That she's sort of bearing down on us with the weight of her majesty. So with my 21st century, I interpret it that she's a real woman. Maybe it's more the imposing nature of her sacredness and her sacred role that they're communicating.
I think so. And if you think about it, this goes back to the early Romanesque kind of queens on their throne as well. So they both have things in common, more in common than apart, I might think. And
there's certainly a stylization in my one, as I like to call it, with the wings. These are very sweet, aren't they? Where you think, how do I do angels' wings? Well, look at birds, and then what do angels do with their wings when they're not flying around? They've sort of popped them back here. So there are sort of otherworldly elements to it as well. Yours is beautiful, and she does have a lovely face. It could just be it's so familiar to me, but for me there's some magic about the encounter when you go to a gallery and you stand in front of a painting and you encounter someone else's spirit. I feel that with the Masaccio. I don't yet with the Gentile, but I'm willing to work on it.
Well, I think they're both great paintings.
They are. We're so lucky to be able to have a fight about them, aren't we, in the National Gallery.